Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for taking time out to stop by. It's appreciated. I hope you had a great weekend. Just to remind you, we've uploaded the entire Mindspeak footage, including my introduction, Vimal's intervention, and the question and answers, and of course, Lagarde's speech. And that's under Rich TV. If you get a chance to have a look at that. I did an interview with Nozifo Banjwa of CNBC regarding the Nairobi Securities Exchange. If you have a chance to have a look at that link. And I'd like to thank Penina Karibe of CCTV Africa for taking my thoughts on Prime Minister Abe Shinzo's visit on Saturday. My macro thoughts return to a fellow called Martin Rees, and if you haven't read any of his books, it's all about cosmology. They're fascinating. And he was asked in the New Statesman, what is your greatest concern for the future? And he said, advances in technology, bio, cyber, and nano will render us vulnerable in new ways. Living as we will in an ever more interconnected and crowded world, we depend on elaborate networks, electric power grids, air traffic control, international finance, just-in-time delivery, and so forth. Unless these systems are highly resilient, their manifest benefits could be outweighed by catastrophic, albeit rare, breakdowns cascading through the system. Pandemics could spread at the speed of jet aircraft, causing maximal havoc in the shambolic but burgeoning megacities of the developing world. Social media could spread psychic contagion, rumors and panic at the speed of light. Malign or foolhardy individuals and small groups have far more power and leverage than in the past. My home thoughts return to two items. One is an article in the New Yorker about chilies. The tip of my tongue being branded by a fine point of steel, of heated steel. And I like this quote by Tim McIntosh about Ibn Battuta. In fact, matter and particle physicists have more in common than one might suppose. Both tug, if in slightly different directions, at the knots which hold the cosmos together. Both look beyond the immediate world of sense perception into one where cause can only be deduced from effect, as invisible as an angel. Both are confronted by Manichean polarities, miracles and black magic, cheap energy versus total destruction. He's done a brilliant documentary about travels with the tangerine. I can't seem to find it anymore on YouTube, but if you get a chance, do look at it. It's super. Iran nuclear deal to take effect on January 20. A deal between Iran and 6 major powers intended to pave the way to a solution to a long standoff over Tehran's nuclear ambitions will come into force on January 20th, the Iranian Foreign Ministry and European Union said on Sunday. The Iranians said, we don't trust them, and senior US officials offered details for the first time on how the estimated $7 billion in sanctions relief envisaged in the November 24 agreement will be distributed. And I wrote about this on the 28th of October 2013 in my piece called Barack Obama and Hassan Rouhani, the two Husseins. And I said the recent rapprochement between President Barack Obama and Iran's Hassan Rouhani has certainly snapped a losing sequence in US-Iranian relations that goes all the way back to the Iranian Revolution in 1979, when Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. The Shah was the second and the last monarch of the House of Pahlavi, and otherwise known as the Peacock Throne. Barack Hussein Obama and Hassan Rouhani share the same name as did Prophet Muhammad's revered grandsons. Those who pursue the study of anthroponymy, which is the study of personal names, especially in the Islamic world, probably view this as very fortuitous. I was wandering around the Hirshhorn Gallery in Washington year before last, and I came across this from the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei. What's in a name? A name is the first and final marker of individual rights, one fixed part of the ever-changing human world. A name is the most basic characteristic of our human rights. No matter how poor or how rich, all living people have a name, and it is endowed with good wishes, the expectant blessings of kindness and virtue. And I must say I do like that. Hussein and Hassan are going to cut through a great deal of interference in this situation. There are powerful vested interests fully invested in the status quo. If the Pax Americana in the Middle East were a three-legged stool, with the US the most important leg, then Israel and Saudi Arabia are the other two legs of that stool. Neither Riyadh nor Tel Aviv are aligned with President Obama's Iranian rapprochement, and Saudi Arabia in particular has become increasingly forthright and is even threatening its own pivot and away from the US. And I was talking about crude oil. It came right down to about $95, $94, then popped up, and we're back down now, just below 93. I'll put up that photograph I took of What's in a Name by Ai Weiwei. Interesting article, Foreign Affairs, Battle Ready Japan. The real story behind Tokyo's first national security strategy. Last month, as the world focused on China's declaration of an air defense identification zone over the East China Sea and its unveiling of political and military reforms after its third plenum, Japan was busy too. In mid-December, Tokyo released a host of defense and security reforms aimed at reconfiguring Japan's security posture, including new National Defense Program guidelines, the establishment of a new US-style National Security Council, and further progress toward reinterpreting the role of its military, the self-defense forces. With these reforms, Japan has created its first ever national security strategy for a time when Japan is confronted by complex and grave national security challenges. And then saying, it's true that Japan's evolving strategy is predominantly focused on China. As the new security strategy guidelines note, China has been rapidly advancing its military capabilities in a wide range of areas through its continued increase in its military budget without sufficient transparency. And I said, Prime Minister Abe Shinzo is evidently the pivot to Asia's point man. The open question is around how much daylight there might be between the US's position and a very nationalist Prime Minister. The leash has not yet been tested. Let us have no doubt that the pivot to Asia is all about the encirclement of China, then the shrinking of its operating theatre, then lighting the tinderbox that is the periphery, and Xinjiang might well morph into China's Afghanistan. You will recall that the architect of Russia's defeat in Afghanistan was Zbigniew Brzezinski, and he remains a foreign policy eminence grise with the president's ear. The US probably feels it holds a decisive hard power advantage at this moment, and given that the trajectory is one of gradual erosion of that decisive advantage, leads me to the view that this pivot to Asia has a logic and momentum of its own. Therefore, I see the US being increasingly determined to press its advantage. One might even posit that calming down the Iranian front allows the US to better concentrate its energies on the pivot to Asia. And I said for the Prime Minister to perform his point man duties, Japan has to militarize. Put up a photograph of the Prime Minister. And also, he started his Africa visit with a visit to Oman, and I'll put up a photograph of His Majesty Sultan Qaboos bin Said receiving the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on arrival. And apparently, His Majesty the Sultan conferred the Oman Civil Order second class on the Japanese Prime Minister. Japan and China have been criticizing each other's Africa policies, Japan has suggested China is buying off African leaders with lavish gifts. China accuses Japan of courting African support for a place on the UN Security Council. Shinzo Abe is touring 3 nations in Africa, the first trip by a Japanese Prime Minister for 8 years. Japan's aid policy is really to aid the human capital of Africa, and you can see the nuance of their case in that kind of comment. Tomohiko Taniguchi admits Japan is lagging behind China in terms of investment in Africa, but he told the BBC that countries like Japan, Britain and France cannot provide African leaders with beautiful houses or beautiful ministerial buildings. Japan's aid policy is to really aid the human capital of Africa. They are clearly playing catch-up, but have established a nuanced and quite sophisticated and differentiated versus China African raison d'etre. China says investment in Africa is mutually beneficial. This is Wang Yi, who's the Chinese foreign minister, called 2014 a year of ever-deepening reform in China with the target of national rejuvenation. The 1.3 billion people of China are working towards the modernization of our country, something, if achieved, will be never before seen in the history of mankind. You can see that competition in there. Japan's Abe, of course, is eyeing Mozambique's gas reserves. They are the world's biggest importer of liquefied natural gas. Since the Fukushima accident, Japan's imports of natural gas for electricity generation have risen enormously, including from Africa. And therefore, the development of natural gas is an extremely important matter for the security and national interest. That's a given. I'll put up a link for a walk through the entrance of the Polana at 4:45 a.m. one morning when I couldn't sleep and I was visiting. A link to an article I wrote in Maputo Boomtown. That was in June 2012, when I said, of course, Mozambique has popped large onto the global radar because of gas reserves that have been discovered offshore and in the deep sea. I'll also put up a photograph of the Polana just outside my room of the sunrise. It was very beautiful indeed. I like this. I found this interesting, and I think you see that story about the gas, why Abe Shinzo is here, tells you about what I've been saying about this being a new energy El Dorado. In the United States, the pivot is now prominent in the discussion of America's strategic future in Asia. The Indian Ocean is itself seen as a kind of pivot all of its own, and I can't agree with that. More, saying that Indian Ocean is now the world's busiest trade route. More than 80% of the world's seaborne trade in oil goes through that, and saying that understanding China's sense of its future not only as a maritime power but also as a naval power requires that we broaden this angle of vision. Strategic importance of the East Indian Ocean as a point d'entrée, a backdoor, if you will, into China, needs to be appreciated once again. And I've spoken about this before when I said a sine qua non of President Barack Obama's pivot to Asia is US NATO power projection of the Indian Ocean. I'll put up a photograph of the Indian Oceans as seen in southern Palms in Dahani. Refer you to that article I wrote, The Pivot to Asia Bears Its Fangs, when I was talking about the air-sea battle concept, distant blockade operations. And I was saying if you're considering distant blockade operations, one of the places you'll be blockading will surely be this area of the world because of that gas and oil that's going to come from here. On 28th of June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophie were shot dead in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip, one of a group of 6 assassins, 5 Serbs and 1 Bosnian Muslim, coordinated by Danilo Ilic. I'll put up a photograph of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, another one of Gavrilo Princip, and then refer to a comment I came across. There are no ordinary times in East Asia, with tensions rising from conflicting territorial claims in the East China and South China Seas. The region increasingly resembles a 21st century maritime redux of the Balkans a century ago, a tinderbox on water. I'll leave Ariel Sharon's demise to a comment I found by Robert Fisk. Why should Arabs care about the final demise of a man who, like much of the Arab world, spent the last years of his existence in a coma? Currency markets: the euro won firmer at 136.78, dollar index softer at 80.62. A 74,000 increase in December payrolls lagged behind the 197,000 advance estimated by economists. The yen is at a 4-week high, 103.38, Swissy 0.9010. The pound above 164 at 164.49, the Aussie back above 90 at 0.9037. And this is the highest since December 12th. Home loan approvals climbed 1.1% in November from the previous month, much faster than the median forecast. India rupee, that's at a 1-month high, I believe, strongest level since December 12th, 61.495. South Korean won 1060.80, Brazilian real 235.86. Egyptian pound firmer 691.99. South African rand 1064.45, but 1055 is the key area for the rand. Obviously, some people were disappointed with the only 74,000 increase in December payrolls, and that took some of the froth off the dollar. I'll put up a 3-month chart of that, and it's at 80.62 last. And I was saying, like trading sell, euro, dollar, my stock remains at 133.80. Dollar, yen, it's at a 4-week high, and there was reflexive move back into the yen. Gold, I'm going to put up a 1-year chart, 1251.38. This is the highest price since December 12th. I remain a bear. Crude oil, $92.58. That push through $100 was a serious head fake. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, Mozambique, Renamo, and the army in battles in Homoini and Gorongosa. Reports are confused and contradictory, but television, cruise, community radio, and mobile telephones mean there is much more reporting than during the war 20 years ago. Fighting has been confirmed at Pembe, in Hambande. Mediafacts report 6 members of the Mozambican riot police killed in the fighting, while STV reports 2 Renamo deaths. And there's a whole story behind what's going on there, and clearly it's heating up quite a bit. Another article I came across: Frelimo increases military action against Renamo guerrillas. Mozambique is facing its worst conflict since 1992, when the Rome Peace Accords brought an end to 16 years of civil war between Renamo and Frelimo. Another story about a gang of 8 armed men on Friday afternoon kidnapped a businessman, Kishore Chutalal, on Felipe Samuel Magai Avenue in the heart of Maputo. And increasingly people are getting concerned about the number of kidnappings, the general lawlessness that's going on there. We've got to keep an eye on that. The American Special Envoy to South Sudan and Sudan, Donald Booth, together with the regional mediators, travelled to an undisclosed location in South Sudan to meet Dr. Riek Machar, said a statement. South Sudan's army have seized back the oil-producing state's capital. Production fell by $45,000 a barrel per day to 200,000 barrels per day. But when I saw photographs of what had been done in these oil facilities, I think it's going to take quite a long time to get it back on track. US military advisors deployed to Somalia to help African forces. That's the first time since Black Hawk Down, less than 5 apparently. South African oil shares down 1.48% this year. Dollar versus rand 1064.10. 1055 is the key level. I'll put up a 1-month chart. I still think it's going to 11. General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has said, if I run, then it must be at the request of the people and with a mandate from my army. We work in a democracy, he said. He's obviously going to stand and win. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the Egyptian pound. That's at 692.03. A little bit firmer. The Egyptian stock market has been on a roll. It's up 4.92% this year. This is a fresh 36-month high. The Nigerian oil share is up 0.37% this year. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 1.85% this year. Africa is a new battleground for the global hotel industry. Very interesting article, which I've quoted in full because it's a subscriber article in the FT, and it's well worth having a look at to get an idea of what people are thinking about in that industry. Permit to hunt endangered rhinos sells for $350,000 despite protests. How sad is that? Kagame said on Sunday, "You cannot betray Rwanda and get away with it. There are consequences for betraying your country. It's a matter of time," he said. "Whoever betrayed the nation cannot escape the consequences," he said in Kinyarwanda during a national prayer breakfast meeting. I'll put up a link for his MindSpeak presentation and a photograph of himself and myself at MindSpeak. I'd like to wish happy birthday to Bob Collymore Esquire, and what a day to be having your birthday. Safaricom closed at a record high of 11.75 on Friday. It's plus 8.796% this year. And there's an interesting article in the Business Daily saying that the stock has gained 36.5 billion shillings in the first 10 days of the year. And somebody saying investors are taking positions ahead of the expected drop in interest rates due to the Eurobond. And I said, I think there's more headroom. I think it gets as high as 1350 by the time of the full year results. I think the bourse is going to complete a sequence of 3 bull years, having begun a sustained rally in 2012, while GDP growth was more subdued in the second half of 2013 than many of us were predicting. I continue to see the main bullish narratives remaining intact. International investors have been the drivers of the bull phenomenon, and I continue to see these investors scaling up exposure through 2014. I'll put up a link to an interview I did with Bob immediately after his first half results. It still contains, I think, a lot of facts which some people have been underestimating. I'll put up a photograph of the railway crossing at Manyani Gate, Savo, and read you what I wrote over the weekend. It was indeed a rare pleasure hosting the inestimable Madame Lagarde at MindSpeak. She said many things, and when Hannah gave her roses and said, "I want to be like you," Madame Lagarde replied, "Work hard and you can be anything you want to be." Her entire speech can be read via a link which is on the website and is worth reading in full. It's nuanced, erudite, sophisticated. Madame Lagarde confirmed that the IMF would imminently upgrade the global economy. The global recovery that is underway remains uneven and subdued, and its underlying dynamics are shifting, she said. Recent indicators suggest that activity in advanced economies is gaining momentum. With regard to Kenya, it's worth appreciating that her visit and her imprimatur is a powerful message of its own. Madame Lagarde said, "Kenya has indeed come a long way over the past few years. The key is now to build on this momentum with the emphasis in the following areas. We might call them the 3 C's: completing fiscal devolution, closing infrastructure gaps, and continuing regional integration." Speaking about devolution, spending needs to remain within the available envelope of public resources and be transparent. And that took me into a rabbit hole. I've been reading Thomas Pynchon's The Bleeding Edge of late, and allow me to insert a quote which floored me and is worthy of the Nobel Prize for Literature all of its own. "No matter how the official narrative of this turns out," it seemed to Heidi, "these are the places we should be looking, not in newspapers or television, but at the margins, graffiti, uncontrolled utterances, bad dreamers who sleep in public and scream in their sleep." So there I am in a feedback loop back to the day when I'd persuaded my directors at Credit Suisse First Boston to allow me to trade interest rate futures. I was given some chunky limits, and I finally reached the cockpit. There I was with the green light to seriously expand the balance sheet. It was an exciting moment, and what with the government all set to pull the trigger on a Eurobond in an amount not less than $1.5 billion and probably $2 billion if market conditions allow. A proposed supersized railway set spend. It seems to me that there are parallels between my moment many years ago and Kenya's moment in 2014. Now, when you trade futures, the first thing you need to be right directionally. You want to be buying something that is going up or be selling something that is going down. Otherwise, you will be stopped out. I'm certain that blowing up the balance sheet to spend on infrastructure is the right thing to do. We are a transit state, the gateway to world markets for the EAC. The Bagamoyo project, therefore, is a fly in our ointment. And in order to embed and entrench that gateway status, we need first-class infrastructure. The gateway needs a gatekeeper, and we can charge a fee. So I have no doubt that directionally this is the right thing to do. In futures trading, there is a term called slippage. Slippage is where you intend to buy something for 1,000 shillings and you end up paying 1,050. That's 50 shillings of slippage right there. Too much slippage is self-evidently a very bad thing. Good trades turn bad, and before too long you will be stopped out. The current news flow in the high-low price range around the railways is signalling elevated slippage risk. President Kenyatta, of course, said the project will define my legacy as President of Kenya. Moving on, the link for Christine Lagarde again is up there on Rich Wrap-Ups. I'll put up a photograph of her on the live feed and remind you that I said if Might Speak was an ice cream sundae, then Christine Lagarde's appearance is like the maraschino cherry that you find on top of the sundae. Indian Ocean newsletter, which is a subscription-based newsletter, and one I don't subscribe to, but I just saw the headline, which I found interesting. The quality of Kenya's government's relations with the IMF will depend to a large extent on how willing President Kenyatta is to cut the size of the civil service. Dennis Brady, the FBI legal attaché in Nairobi, said, "We believe, as do the Kenyan authorities, that the 4 gunmen inside the mall were killed." I don't believe that, frankly. Our ERT evidence response team made significant finds, and there is no evidence that any of the attackers escaped from the area where they made their last stand. This point is a fair one. Additionally, had the attackers escaped, who would have been publicly celebrated and exploited for propaganda purposes by Al-Shabaab. That hasn't happened. I'll put up a photograph of Westgate, the day it was burning. And I took a photograph from CNBC Africa, which is right in town. The Nairobi All Shares had a splendid start to the year. It's up 3.549% in 2014. NSE 20 is up 2.7106% in 2014. Equity turnover has been pretty brisk. Safaricom set a record high for the 4th consecutive session in 2014. And as I said in the commentary I wrote on Friday, sub-Saharan equity markets ex-South Africa, and I said South Africa finds itself at the bleeding edge of the taper. And the rand, you will note, was at 5-year lows this week, but before a late bounce. African markets have had a real solid start. Egypt at a 36-month high, Ghana at all-time highs. And as I said, the Nairobi All Share up 3.549%. So I expect that narrative to be maintained, and I expect the stock market to have a good year for the 3rd year running. Once again, thank you for stopping by.